Over a winter football field in North Dakota, a small fighter climbed into a darkening sky and locked onto a single white light that seemed to know exactly how to lead him. What was it doing up there, and why did it refuse to behave like any aircraft he had ever seen? The place was Fargo in October 1948, a flat edge of the American plains where weather, distance, and night can make the sky feel much larger than the ground. In that vastness, a strange light could seem both impossibly close and maddeningly out of reach. Post-war America was full of fast aircraft, nervous headlines, and a public already primed to look up. Every unexplained light now carried a new weight, especially when a trained military pilot was the one describing it. The pilot at the center of the case was First Lieutenant George Gorman, flying a North Dakota Air National Guard P-51 on a routine training night. What began as ordinary airwork soon became one of the most discussed chases in early flying saucer history. He had already noticed a bright object moving near the field before the chase began, and that first glimpse mattered. It was not a vague flash on the horizon, but a distinct light that seemed to hold its own position with purpose. When Gorman turned toward it, the light did not simply drift away. Witness accounts say it climbed, shifted, and answered his movements with a kind of intelligence that made the pursuit feel personal. That detail is central to the mystery. The object was reported not as a fixed star or a distant beacon, but as something engaged in the chase. It appeared to react, as if the sky itself had become a game of pursuit. Gorman later described repeated turns and climbs as he tried to close the gap. Each time he pressed in, the light seemed to match him, keeping a separation that felt deliberate rather than accidental. The most striking part of the account is the apparent change in altitude and direction without the ordinary signs of an aircraft. There was no visible fuselage, no navigation lamps, no engine glow, just a hard white point, moving with uncanny confidence. At one point, the light was said to pass close enough that Gorman felt he could almost touch it. That near encounter gave the case its enduring charge, because distance in the air is one thing, proximity is another entirely. Other pilots and ground observers were also drawn into the event, and their presence kept the story from becoming a private illusion. However it was interpreted, something unusual was being watched by more than one set of eyes. That shared attention matters because it moves the case from memory alone into collective experience. The light was not just reported, it was pursued, tracked, and discussed in real time by trained airmen. The chase unfolded over a town and airfield where ordinary life was still visible below. Houses, streets, and stadium lights stayed fixed, while the object above seemed to ignore every rule that should have anchored it. That contrast is part of why the case endures. The ground was familiar, measurable, and still. The sky above it became a place where motion itself seemed to lose its usual meaning. As the pursuit continued, the object's behavior reportedly grew even harder to classify. It did not settle into the steady path of a plane, and it did not vanish like a meteor. It remained present, responsive, and strangely controlled. For believers in the case, this is where the mystery becomes hard to dismiss. A light that changes course, keeps pace, and seems to anticipate a fighter's moves invites a question larger than simple misidentification. Still, the era offers a natural place to look for explanations. Night flying could be deceptive, and the eye can misjudge distance, speed, and size when all it has is darkness and a single bright point. Searchlights, stars, planets, and atmospheric effects all deserve a careful hearing. In a sky with limited reference points, even experienced observers can be pulled into a chase that feels more precise than the evidence can support. Yet the Gorman account persists because it contains more than a vague sighting. It includes a sequence, first the light, then the pursuit, then the repeated evasive maneuvers that made the object seem active rather than passive. That sequence gave investigators something concrete to work with, and it also gave the public a story that felt almost impossible to place. Was it a trick of distance, a conventional aircraft, or something that simply did not fit the category? The strongest believer's reading is straightforward. A trained pilot saw an object perform in ways that suggested unusual intelligence and control. If that account is even partly accurate, The event sits near the edge of known aviation history. Supporters also point to the emotional consistency of the story. Gorman did not describe a fleeting spark. He described a sustained airborne encounter that stayed vivid enough to be recalled and debated for decades. Skeptical readings usually begin with the limits of night perception. A bright object against a dark sky can appear to dart or stop when the observer is moving fast, turning hard, and trying to keep visual contact. Some explanations also lean on the possibility of astronomical confusion or another aircraft seen under difficult conditions. Those ideas do not erase the story, but they remind us how fragile certainty can be at altitude. Even so, the case leaves behind a stubborn residue. If the light was only a misread object, why did the chase unfold with such consistency across multiple reports? And why did it feel so responsive to the pilot? That is the question that keeps Gorman's encounter alive. Not whether the sky was strange, but whether something in it was truly interacting with him. The difference between a light and a presence is where the mystery deepens. The official record of the era shows how quickly early flying saucer reports were folded into larger uncertainty. Pilots, officers, and investigators were all trying to interpret a new kind of public mystery with incomplete tools. That uncertainty is part of the case's power. It belongs to a moment when aviation was advancing fast, but the language for unexplained aerial events was still being invented in real time. Seen that way, the Gorman Dogfight is not just a story about one light in one sky. It is a record of the moment when modern flight met a question it could not easily answer. And because the object was never fully identified, the case remains suspended between possibilities. It may have been a misperception, a conventional light, or something more elusive that briefly entered the human story. What lingers is the image of a pilot chasing a light that would not behave like a light should. More than 70 years later, that simple image still feels unfinished. Maybe the answer is buried in the limits of perception, in wartime-era training, or in the imperfect language of early reports. Or maybe the sky over Fargo briefly revealed something that was never meant to be easy to name.